Hi, welcome everyone. We'll let everyone join the Zoom room and then we'll get started. So we'll just give it a minute while people are joining in. Welcome everyone. Thanks for your patience. We are just going to give it one more minute while people are joining in. It looks like we're starting to slow down, so maybe we'll get started since we turned on a couple minutes late. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're very pleased that Dr. Shah agreed to join us. As the members of the COVID task force, we have had the privilege of getting to pick her brain all along, and we wanted to extend that invitation to you. So Dr. Shah has prepared a presentation that'll last about a half an hour for you to enjoy, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. And we'll use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen, but I think it probably makes sense for you to wait until Dr. Shah completes her presentation before you go ahead and start asking your questions in case your questions get answered during the presentation. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you. Thank you, Dr. Shah.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So I just wanted to give a brief update on, kind of what's going on in COVID. There's a little bit of new CDC guidance, and then mainly address how, things about the vaccine, how things are going, and where we're headed. So just to start, this is kind of where we stand as of today, the United States. I'm sure everyone's aware that, our number of new COVID cases continues to decline. And this was a nice kind of headline from the New York Times last week that said the drop is real. So cases are down by 40%. And which is good news, but it's important to note that the daily numbers of new cases and deaths remain much higher still than the first two peaks of the pandemic, which we went through in the spring and the summer of 2020. The Connecticut graph looks pretty similar, but in the sense we've had two peaks. One was in the spring of 2020, and then one more recently, which began in the fall. And similarly, in the state, we continue to see a decline in our new cases week over week, and this is something that we're very pleased by. And these are kind of some interesting graphics that the CDC started to put out last week that basically looks at each state and looks at either new cases per 100,000, which is in the top left corner, viral positivity in the top right here, and the top of the graph or the top of the slide is 1 week ahead of the bottom, or 1 month ahead. So the bottom part is 1 month before, and the top is current. And what you can see is in Connecticut, in terms of the new cases and the viral positivity, we look less severe, right? So we're less red here this month compared to last month. Our viral positivity is less compared to the month prior. And then similarly, if you look at our admissions to hospitals here on the left and new deaths on the right, also less severe compared to last month. So just supporting the fact that we're getting into a better place in the state. This is data from Stamford, and this is data that comes from the Department of Health, and we keep track of this every week at the hospital. And again, week by week, we're seeing a really nice decline in our cases, and the similar case holds true for our positivity rate. So these are all COVID tests sent through Stamford Health, and our positivity rate last week was 1%. I don't think we've seen something that low since kind of, the end of the summer. Still doing about 4,000 tests per week. So this is data that we're really happy about. And then this is the Fairfield County hospitalizations. Again, very similar to what we're seeing around the state. This is a graph from the CDC, because the question becomes, why are we seeing a decline, right? Is it because people are getting better at our public health measures? Are they masking better? Are they social distancing? Have we reached a point where enough people in the country have gotten COVID, or are the vaccines starting to have an effect? And this is nationwide data, and this is hospitalizations by age group. And what's most notable here is the red bar is the age group above 65. And what you can see is this nice decline since the beginning of this calendar year of hospitalizations in folks above the age of 65, which could suggest that vaccinations are starting to perhaps play a role in some of these trends. And I think what's most striking about everything that we've seen so far is the impact that our public health measures have had on other respiratory viruses. So this is a graph of our internal data from Stamford Health, and the purple line is our COVID cases, and the green line is the flu. And this dates back to December 1st of 2019. So this is looking at all of 2020. So here's the end of our flu season last year, and we have seen absolutely no flu this year. And as you can see, that's not the case for COVID. And an even better representation of that is seen here, that this is the number of our flu cases and RSV cases, which is another type of respiratory virus that commonly affects children. Year over year, 200, 400 cases of the flu. 2020 to 2021, we've had 2 cases of the flu, neither of whom were hospitalized, and only 1 case of RSV, again, not hospitalized. So, our public health measures work great for the flu and RSV and other respiratory viruses, but it's clearly not doing the trick for COVID. COVID's a little bit of a different animal. So speaking of public health measures, a big public health measure that has been put into place is masking, right? So we're masking everywhere. We're masking in schools. We're masking when we go to the grocery store, et cetera, masking at work. And so the CDC recently updated their masking guidelines last week. And I just wanted to quickly touch on it because it's a common source of confusion. And I just want to clarify what the recommendations mean. So if you take anything away from the slide, it's that a well-fitting mask is the best mask. So a mask works the best when everybody wears them, but not all masks are created equal. So a mask that's well-fitting is one that completely covers your nose and your mouth, and one that fits snugly across the sides of your face and doesn't have any gaps. And so the CDC really came out last week and said, hey, like if your mask doesn't fit well, there are some strategies that you can use to improve that fit. And these are some of the strategies that they threw out there for the community. So, getting masks with a nose wire, right? So the nose wire really conforms to your face to make it tighter. Mask fitters, which is what's seen here in this picture, or an extender, right? To keep the mask kind of tighter around your face so you're not getting gaps on the sides. Knotting and tucking is another method. There's actually a ton of YouTube videos that shows you how to do this, but it's basically tying knots on the side of a surgical mask to make it fit tighter around your face. And then comes the double masking. So using a cloth mask over a string mask purely as a way to enhance the fit of your string mask. So it's not about, you need more layers to protect you better, or that you need 2 masks because it filters better. It's more because the cloth mask actually just like pushes the mask on your face and makes it a little bit tighter. And that's where the recommendation for this double masking comes from. The CDC clearly states that you should not wear 2 surgical masks because it doesn't make it fit better. If one doesn't fit right, putting 2 on of the same type of mask is not going to make it any better. And then they also do not recommend wearing a cloth mask over a KN95 mask, which a lot of people are now wearing out in the community. Those KN95 masks are created to fit your face a little bit better. And if you put a cloth mask on it, the outer portions can actually fan out and it makes it a worse fit. So these are just ways that, you can enhance the fit of your mask, but, it doesn't mean that everybody needs to double mask. There's all different types of strategies that you can use to enhance the fit. So what's keeping me up at night, you know, over the past couple of weeks is the variants, right? And so this is what's in the news. You know, we're seeing mutations occur at an increased frequency on coronavirus. And this is something that happens on many different types of viruses. This happens with the flu every year. But you know, these changes, some of them can be inconsequential, but some of them can change the virus to a point that it affects issues of infectivity, mortality, and immune recognition, and most importantly, how well our therapies respond to the virus. Do our monoclonal antibody therapies work? Do our vaccines work? And that's kind of the biggest concern about these variants. The three most popular variants that are have been identified are the UK strain, the South Africa strain, and the Brazilian strain. And as of this week, Governor Lamont announced that there have been 42 strains of the UK strain that have been identified in Connecticut. And this week we learned that we had the first case of a South African variant was identified in a Fairfield County resident who's now hospitalized out of the state. This individual did not travel, which suggests that it is, you know, possibly starting to circulate in our community. And the problem with this is that there's a significant lag in detecting these variants because we can't detect these in our regular labs. We send samples up to the state for testing, and sometimes it can take 2, 3, sometimes 4 weeks to get those results back. So this is likely an underrepresentation of what's actually going on in the community. What these variants do, what we know is that they're much more transmissible, up to 70% more. So they can spread way easier in the community. Reinfection has been documented in the literature. So people who've had kind of the first type of COVID, the original, have been reinfected with the variant. So that's also concerning. And of course, what we're worried about is the strain that this is going to have on our hospitalizations, case numbers, mortality, strains on our PPE supplies, everything that we went through back in 2020 at this very same time when we were watching what was coming from Wuhan and from Italy is kind of how we feel right now. There's no evidence at this point that these are more dangerous, but it does really highlight the urgency for vaccine deployment as quickly as possible. And this information from Israel actually I thought was very reassuring. And this kind of was published. This report was published earlier this week. So Israel's had a very efficient vaccine rollout, and they kind of did a population study in Israel, and they reported that the vaccine in real life use in Israel is 93% effective in the population that they studied. And this is a lot of folks that received 2 doses of the mRNA vaccines. And what's interesting and actually reassuring is that 40% of the COVID isolates circulating in Israel were the UK strain. So that suggests that the vaccines are actually still effective for the UK strains. The South African variants, again, are the ones that we're a little bit more concerned about. So speaking of vaccines, this is the COVID vaccine tracker that's available in the New York Times. 20 vaccines right now that are in phase 3 trials. While this is really great, I feel like the vaccine landscape is going to get very confusing by the end of this year because there's going to be a lot of different options out there, and we're still trying to figure out how we're going to juggle all that. Obviously, the 2 that we're using in the United States are Moderna and Pfizer, which are the mRNA vaccines. Oxford, AstraZeneca, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines are currently in the process or will be in the process of FDA approval and for an emergency use authorization. Johnson & Johnson will likely be the next available vaccine in the United States, and that's projected to be available in the very beginning of March. So probably in a couple of weeks, if it's approved, the J&J vaccine will be available. So just to quickly talk about how the mRNA vaccines work, because I know this is like a cause of a lot of myths about the vaccine and people being hesitant to take it. So the vaccine is an mRNA vaccine, and this is not to go over like a biology lesson by any means, but basically what this does is that the vaccine injects a small amount of the mRNA that's encased in a fatty particle like a fat shell into the muscle of your arm. It's taken up by the cell. The RNA kind of, it translates into a protein. And that protein is the spike protein that everybody talks about, right? So that spike protein is key for the immune system to recognize COVID and fight it. And so what the vaccine does is it really stimulates your immune system to make memory cells so that if you are infected with COVID after you're getting vaccinated, your body says, hey, I've seen this before in my immune system. I'm going to fight the COVID and I'm not going to get sick from COVID. So that's kind of how the mRNA technology works. And it's a very nice, clean, kind of pure vaccine. And obviously it's effective. So here are the two kind of these were the two major trials that looked at Pfizer and Moderna. And I put this slide on to illustrate that over 70,000 people were in these trials combined. And again, Pfizer was 16 and above, Moderna was 18 above. And the breakdown was pretty similar between both the trials in terms of gender, minority representation, comorbidities, meaning people with other medical problems, and then age. About a quarter of the people were above the age of 65. And what you can see here is that both vaccines were 94% effective, which was, obviously just stunning data to us that we were very pleased by. And this was true across all of these categories. So it didn't matter if you were above 55 or below 55, or if you, had diabetes or not, or if you were male or female, the effectiveness was the same across all these groups. And in terms of side effects, what was seen most commonly in the trials is what we're seeing real life on the ground as we distribute vaccine to thousands of people. Most commonly kind of injection site soreness, which can last for a day or two, fatigue, headache, muscle pains, less commonly fever, but very, very mild symptoms that last for 24 to 48 hours and then resolve. Serious adverse events at the bottom here is something that would be classified like that you would need to take a day off from work, for example, because you don't feel well. Only 0.5% to 1% in all of these individuals. So overall, the data is really promising. And this just shows you, this is from both of the trials. So the left is Pfizer and the right is Moderna. The red line is placebo and the blue line is the vaccine group. And what this shows is a cumulative incidence of COVID. And what you can see here is that these vaccines are almost interchangeable. They're very similar in terms of their efficacy at preventing symptomatic COVID and those in the vaccine group. So this is also some real life data, which from when I read this, I thought, okay, this is something that's reassuring about these vaccines. So this is data actually that was pulled from almost a month ago now, the end of January. And this is when the US had gotten to over 20 million doses of COVID vaccine given. And vSafe is an app that you download after you receive your COVID vaccine, and it's a CDC app, and it basically monitors your symptoms. So once you get your vaccine, you can go on your app and say, oh, I have muscle pain today. And people are kind of real life kind of recording this data. And what's striking here is that the breakdown of the reactions to the vaccine is very similar to what was seen in the clinical trial. So most often 70% was pain at the injection site. Then again, fatigue, headache, muscle pain were the next ones, and then fever and chills less so. So this shows that what's happening with the vaccine on the ground in real life really matches what was happening in the trials, which to me validates the trials even more, that that these vaccines are safe. There's a big issue around anaphylaxis with these vaccines. Anaphylaxis means a severe allergic reaction. And from the data that's been tabulated so far, from all the vaccines that have been given, that the risk is thought to be about 2 to 5 per million of vaccinations of the mRNA vaccine. So it's a pretty low risk of anaphylaxis. 90% of the cases that have occurred so far in this country have occurred within 30 minutes of getting the dose. And so the CDC has kind of laid out some guidelines about who should receive the vaccine and who should not. And I think what's important to know is that the only contraindication to this vaccine is that if you've had an immediate allergic reaction to a previous mRNA vaccine, meaning if you had an allergic reaction within 4 hours to your first COVID shot, then we would obviously defer your second shot. The CDC says to proceed with caution if you've had any sort of anaphylaxis to other injectable vaccines or injectable drugs. So it's not necessarily a contraindication, but it's something that needs to be discussed with your doctor and to go over risk benefits to say, should you receive this vaccine or maybe wait for a different type of vaccine formulation. And then if you're allergic to pets, foods, oral drugs, insect venom, bee stings, latex, not a contraindication, you can proceed. We do offer 30-minute on-site observation at our vaccine clinic for anyone who has a history of severe allergies, and that's something that's noted when you sign up. The regular observation period is 15 minutes, so we double it for those who had a history of allergy. So unanswered questions about this vaccine, the biggest one being, what is the durability? So how long does the immunity last? We still don't know, but it's been suggested that it's, on the probably 6 months, maybe longer, maybe a year. The variants will have an effect on that, and it will really dictate when we need boosters. What is the effect on asymptomatic infection and asymptomatic spread, right? So this is the reason why we're still wearing masks if we've been vaccinated, because what the trial did not look at was the participants' ability to spread COVID without having any symptoms. And so that's something that is still being looked at. And then again, what will happen with the emergence of the variant strains? What boosters are being made? When are we going to have to get them? And that's something that's actively evolving. And then there's flexibility in the dosing regimens. This is common debate, 1 dose versus 2 doses. The UK is doing 1 dose. And here in the US and here at Stamford Health, we strongly advocate for getting 2 doses. We want to get everyone to that 95% efficacy. The CDC says you can wait 6 weeks between your 2 doses. So if something happens and you can't make it to your 3 or 4 week follow-up, you have up to 6 weeks to get that second shot. Mixing vaccines, while not recommended routinely, is okay. And that again goes back to the fact that the 2 mRNA vaccines are so similar, almost interchangeable, that the CDC says if you got Pfizer for your first, you could technically get Moderna for your second if there's a supply issue, or if you don't remember what you got. We've had to do that, a couple of times in our vaccine clinic, and it's been okay. And then, for people who come down with COVID, there's, some questions about when should they get vaccinated? Should they wait 3 months? Should they not? So these are kind of things that we're looking at and we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis as we vaccinate a bunch of people. And then, of course, how long will it take to reach herd immunity? Because that's what everybody really wants to get to, right? To like getting life back to normal. We can take off the masks, we can socialize in a normal way. That still remains a little bit unclear. So I get this question a lot that we've been vaccinating folks at the hospital, including healthcare workers, since the middle of December. December 17th was when our vaccine campaign started. And so what we're coming across a lot of vaccine hesitancy, including in our healthcare workers and our workforce members at Stamford Health. And so these are kind of the common things that we're hearing, that people that don't want to get vaccinated. So there's a lot of concerns about people being of childbearing age, effects on fertility and pregnancy and lactation, concerns about different cultural backgrounds not being well represented in the trials. If I still have to wear a mask and do all these things, like, why should I get vaccinated? It's not going to change my life. Side effects, there's concerns about, including the allergy issue, concern that the trials kind of went too quickly and we can't trust them. The scientists don't know what they're doing. And, if I already had COVID, I can never get COVID again, so I don't need to get vaccinated. That's a very big myth. It's not true. Again, we've seen reinfections in many cases, and then the variants obviously change that game. And then, difficulty with scheduling doses, right? This is kind of like a real life concern. Getting onto the website, navigating that with your elderly family members and trying to get them an appointment, sometimes that can also lead to some folks just giving up and saying, forget it, this is too hard for me. So, can vaccination allow a change in behavior? And again, we just don't know. We have limited information about the ability of these vaccines to reduce asymptomatic spread. And so we say everybody needs to follow the public health measures, even if you're vaccinated. However, last week the CDC did put out some new guidance about being the necessity of being quarantined if you've been exposed to someone with COVID. So if you've been fully vaccinated for COVID and you are directly exposed to someone who's COVID, so say someone in your house has COVID, your child, or you're exposed at work or at a social event, and you've been fully vaccinated, the CDC says that you do not have to quarantine. And actually, you're free from quarantine for 3 months since the receipt of your second vaccine. So you have a 3-month period of time that you're kind of protected. We're anticipating that that 3 month is going to extend as we get more data about the durability of these vaccines. But I think the CDC went this direction because I think they realized that symptomatic spread of COVID is so much more significant than asymptomatic spread. And so it's kind of another reason to get vaccinated, and shows you that there's enough protection that you don't even have to quarantine after getting exposed. So the other vaccines that are being looked at, again, at the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. AstraZeneca is coming in at about 70% efficacy at preventing symptomatic COVID, Johnson & Johnson 66%. So the mRNA vaccines are looking much better than the adenovirus vector vaccines, but close to 70% is still pretty good. And we take that. And the Johnson & Johnson vaccine will be nice because it doesn't have to be stored in freezing cold temperatures. So this is the vaccine that can be stored in doctors' offices. And so this may really change the game in March if this gets approved and starts coming into the state, in terms of getting vaccine into more arms. So in terms of the vaccine rollout in Connecticut, just to go over where things stand, obviously we started with phase 1A on December 17th. That was the healthcare workers, emergency first responders, and our nursing home residents and nursing home staff. After a month, phase 1B started, which we're in now, and the state is going through 1B in waves. So the first wave was 75 and above, which started in mid-January. And as of last Thursday, the state started vaccinating 65 and above. Coming next will be frontline essential workers and individuals with underlying medical conditions that are under the age of 65. What that's going to look like, we don't know. The state hasn't really kind of given that information yet. I think those are plans that are still being formulated, but the goal for that is to get those groups, in line, hopefully by next month. So Stamford Health partnered with the city of Stamford to create a community vaccination program for phase 1B, which opened in mid-January. We have a daily capacity of 1,200 vaccines per day, which is a lot of people to come through the hospital, a lot of parking issues, a lot of issues with the snow and the weather. But thankfully, that's kind of the cap. They actually went over that this past weekend. The next stage that's in the planning stages is the mega site at Elmcroft, which is the old Pitney Bowes building down by the water at Harbor Point. That is slotted to open on March 1st. And the daily capacity of vaccines there the plan is about 2,000 to 3,000 vaccines per day. It's massive. It's a huge undertaking. The biggest barrier to that site opening and reaching that capacity is vaccine availability. So the state still hasn't necessarily committed to giving us that much vaccine, even though we're saying that we can do it. So that's something that, changes and evolves week by week. And then stage 3 is going to be the physician offices. Right. So again, this is when that J&J vaccine gets approved. We'll eventually transition these vaccines into doctors' offices. And, that may be an easier way to vaccinate those that are under the age of 65 that have a medical condition. They can go to their doctor and get their shot. Everything, again, depends on vaccine supply, which is just kind of a influx. In terms of how Connecticut's doing as a state, this is the percent of the population in Connecticut that has received their first dose of COVID vaccine. So this was data tabulated from the 75 and above group. So 53% of those above the age of 75 received their first dose. This is data as of last week. And then as of the total population of Connecticut, that represents about 10% of the state. And then in terms of Stamford, as of last week, our total first dose coverage was 8.2%. So similar. And then again, the first dose coverage for 75 and above in Stamford was about 57%. And these are numbers that are updated week on week. So this is from last week. This is just a snapshot of our internal dashboard for our vaccination clinic. And what you can see, I just put this to illustrate how many shots we've given through Stamford Health. So over 25,000 shots have been given to nearly 20,000 individuals. This is not up to date now. This is 2-3 days old. So it's more than that, with 21,000 folks scheduled over the next few weeks. So the demand is high, which is good. We want to give vaccines to as many people, almost to everyone that's eligible. And so it's the team is working very hard to get that done. In terms of how to sign up, there's a few different ways. This is a snapshot from the Connecticut Department of Health. So if you're eligible, or if you have a family member who's eligible and they're having trouble scheduling their vaccine, you can go to this website on the Connecticut Department of Health, and you put in your zip code here under the vaccine tab, and you actually can find all the locations where the vaccine's being given. And then this is the Stamford Health website, stanfordhealth.org. If you click the banner at the top, it says COVID vaccine. You schedule your vaccine, you book an appointment here, and it's very easy to click on this website and verify your eligibility and get an appointment. And that's it. So let me stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much. That was great. You covered a lot of information in a short period of time and made it digestible. So thank you. We do have a few questions, which is great. One question that I think you sort of answered, but maybe you could expand a little bit, is how it's determined that someone has a variant. Are only certain tests being tested further, or are all the tests going through that process you mentioned about going to another lab?
Yeah, very good question. So about several weeks ago, we started a surveillance program from our hospital. We send 10 samples a week to the state, random sampling, to see if we're seeing any variants. More recently, we've had a couple interesting cases of folks that have come down with COVID and we're curious as to whether they have a variant. So then we have the ability to send those to the state lab. We collect their sample in a certain way and communicate with the state and send it up there. So on a grand scale, it's just random sampling, but there is an ability to kind of, send certain ones if we're suspicious. It's not a good system because it's there's a very big lag, and there's probably a lot of under detection going on because it's not something that can be done quickly, or in a timely fashion.
Great, thank you. And then is this going to be a yearly vaccination like the flu?
It's possible with the way, what we're seeing with the mutations. It's possible that we'll need, our yearly flu shot and our yearly COVID shot. Moderna is already working on a booster to respond to these other variants, most notably the South African variant. And that may be something that we may need to revaccinate everyone before the end of the year. We don't know, but it's definitely possible. And that's how the flu vaccine changes every year as well. Similar process.
Great. This is just thank you. This is just a thank you. That's so nice. There's a question about the doubling masks. If you have an N95 with a ventilator, should you wear a cloth mask over it?
An N95 with the ventilator part I'm a little confused about. Maybe they're referring to a filter
I
valve.
think they mean the filter, yeah.
So we actually don't recommend wearing any masks with a filter valve, and the CDC doesn't either, because while it can protect the person that's wearing the mask, the germs can escape through that valve and it doesn't protect people around you, which is part of, we wear masks to protect ourselves and protect others. And then wearing N95s is actually not recommended in the community. So, but if you feel the need to wear an N95, there's no need to wear a cloth mask over it, because it's a well-fitting mask, but those masks should really be reserved for healthcare workers.
Great. Um, I'm just going to go through these. I was trying to sort of cluster them by topic, but
That's
but
fine.
I think it's easier if I just go through one at a time. So this question is about side effects. Can you please talk about the people that have died or others who have had face palsy? I think that's side effects from the vaccine, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so Bell's palsy in the study is the face palsy. That's Bell's palsy, which means that part of your face can you get like the facial droop. It's a neurologic condition that results from a whole host of things. So the original trials that looked at Pfizer and Moderna did see some cases of Bell's palsy in the participants, but the study concluded that the percentage of individuals who developed Bell's palsy in that trial was similar to the percentage of people in the general public who get Bell's palsy. So there was no causative relationship between the vaccine and Bell's palsy. So it's not a contraindication to receiving it. We haven't seen any Bell's palsy to date from anyone after the vaccine. And we also haven't seen any death after the vaccine.
Thank you. Can you comment on the eligibility criteria to receive monoclonal antibody treatment, and also is receiving monoclonal antibody treatment affect the vaccine timing?
Yeah, great question. So we rolled out our monoclonal antibody therapy program at Stamford Health on about 3 months ago, so in mid-November. So monoclonal antibodies, just to briefly, it's the Regeneron product and the Lilly product. The Regeneron, I think everyone heard about in the news when Trump got it. These are basically it's an infused medication that gives you antibodies to target that spike protein on COVID. So it's almost like a bridge to a vaccine. So we basically infuse anyone who's above the age of 40 who has been diagnosed with COVID in the past 10 days. And that's it. That's all you need to do to qualify is be above the age of 40. Different hospitals across the state have different eligibility criteria depending on their capacity to give the infusion. We have a very high capacity because of the way our system's kind of built. So we infuse 2 to 3 patients a day. Actually, we've done probably close to 150 infusions or infused 150 patients so far. And it's been shown in studies to decrease the risk of hospitalization from COVID. Anybody who gets a monoclonal antibody infusion is to wait 90 days until their vaccine. Because the thought is that it's a bridge to the vaccine. So it almost gives you that immunity for 3 months. And so you don't need the vaccine for those 3 months. Once you hit that 90-day point, then you get your vaccine.
Great. There are a few questions about the possibility for children to get vaccines. Are there trials going on, or what's the status of that?
Yeah, so Pfizer fully enrolled ages 12 to 16, and that data is slotted to be released in the first quarter of this year. So I'm hoping by the end of March, we'll have some data on 12 and above. Moderna has been trying to recruit adolescents, but there's been a lot of challenges with compliance with the vaccine, kind of study protocols with teenagers, and just not, the follow-up and all that stuff. There's been some challenges with recruiting adolescents. Under those ages, there's some stuff that's starting, but under that age, we're not expected to see vaccines, I think, until the end of this year or possibly into 2022. But 12 and above could be a possibility with Pfizer by, sometime mid-year or the fall, if the data looks good from the trials that are going on right now.
Great. This is a New York State resident who's frustrated with how long it's taking to get an appointment for her 80-year-old plus parents, just wondering if it's any smoother in Connecticut. Do you know
Yeah,
if people are struggling to get appointments or if it's working a little bit better?
I've heard that in New York. I have a biased view because I have a way of just like, getting someone an appointment very quickly because I'm very engaged in the process at our hospital. But it's frustrating, and I think it just depends on the day of the week too. So for example, you may log on to the Connecticut site today and you'll see no appointments for 4 weeks. And you log on tomorrow and you see 1,000 appointments. And the reason why that is because the vaccine appointments are released as the vaccine supply comes in. So you don't want to overpromise and cancel appointments because I think people will not be happy, right, with that. And so I oftentimes tell people who are having trouble with scheduling to keep checking. So like check every day. We released about 1,000 appointments last Friday. When on Thursday it looked like we were completely booked, and then the whole weekend was wide open because of a vaccine supply issue. So I'm hoping it'll get better, but it's all about the vaccine supply.
Are patients with the B.1.17 variant treated differently? Are there different symptoms? And I guess we could extend that to any of the other variants as well.
At this point in time, no. Especially for the UK variant, which is the B.1.17, because that one is thought to still, our vaccines should still work for that variant. The monoclonal antibody therapy should still work. For the other variants, the South African variant, we're still learning. The Lilly monoclonal antibody is not effective for the South African variant. The Regeneron one is. So there's little decisions like that we sometimes make. Lilly did come out with a new product. It was FDA approved under an EUA last week to combine it with another one to make it more effective against the variants. We're still waiting to get that from the state. So broader answer is no, but there's, we're still learning about those changes.
Great. This is interesting. So this is a question about when will educators be able to schedule appointments? We were originally told we were going to be scheduled as a school. Has that changed? Now, from my perspective, that has not changed. We have sent over our lists, our roster of educators, and we're just waiting to get the go ahead to sort of batch load them into the system and schedule through the school. But maybe you have more intel than I have on that.
Yeah, I wish I did, but the plan is that they are, the educators, the teachers, the school staff, that they're considered frontline essential workers, and that they would be included in the next wave of 1B. We still don't know if the next wave is going to be essential workers and 65 and under with other medical conditions, or if it's going to be one or the other. Really depends on supply. So I'm hoping we'll know more by the beginning of March, which is right around the corner. And then with the J&J, if that comes through, that could also change, how they approach it.
Great. Could you talk again about the difference of the immunity of a person who's had COVID and a person who is vaccinated?
Sure. So there is a difference in natural immunity, which is immunity that you get from having COVID, and vaccine mediated immunity. The natural immunity is thought to be short-lived. The classic kind of teaching is 90 days, but there's been some suggestion that it's maybe a little bit longer, maybe 4 months or 5 months. But you can definitely get COVID again. And we've seen that. And especially with the variants, reinfection has definitely been documented. the immunity you get from the vaccine, it's a different type of antibody response. It's the antibody to the spike protein, which is thought to be the kind of the more longer lasting immunity, which is why the scientists targeted that protein when they developed the vaccine. So vaccine mediated immunity is thought to be longer lived and better than natural immunity, which is why if you've had COVID, you should still get the shot.
Great. And then how long after having the virus should someone wait to get the vaccine?
Yeah, good question. So the CDC states that if you've recovered from your COVID and you've completed your 10-day period of isolation, and you're no longer sick and you feel well, that you can get the vaccine. If you want to wait a period of 90 days, that's also okay. It's not a requirement to wait. I think that comes up more when there are issues with vaccine supply within a group. So if you have, let's say you're vaccinating your company and you can only vaccinate a certain percentage, you may want to prioritize those who've had COVID in the last 90 days towards the end because they've got some, immunity. But after those 10 days, you are able to get the shot.
Excellent. So looking forward to next year, do you have any guesses on whether social distancing will still be required? I know it sounded like in your presentation you think masks will still be in use, but do you think social distancing as well?
Is it what I hope or what I think? The struggle
You
is
can answer
real.
both.
I think we're going to be in a better spot towards the end of this year. By the holiday time, fall and stuff, I think once we get better vaccine uptake, we get a better handle on these variants, boosters, stuff like that. I think we'll be in a better spot. I think what's most striking is the flu data that, we see no flu with masking. And social in schools and in our hospital, we have no hospitalizations with flu. And year over year, we see so many people die from the flu in the ICU. Like I personally, just from taking care of these patients, it almost goes to it almost makes you think, does it make sense to just continue to mask through flu season? Get your shot and mask through flu season because it prevents a lot of disease and mortality in the community and nationwide. So there's a lot of debate going on about that. What are hospital administrators going to decide to do about masking through flu season? My hope is that we'll be able to relax some of our, public health measures by the end of this year. But don't get mad at me if that's not the case.
Okay, here's a question. If the Johnson & Johnson vaccine becomes more available, let's say in April, and so someone goes ahead and gets that vaccine, can he or she or they have the Pfizer vaccine at a later date to get the 95% protection?
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't know. So we haven't seen the Johnson & Johnson data. So the table I showed you from Moderna and Pfizer was published in very reputable medical journals, and then we could dissect it. We don't have that yet for Johnson & Johnson. So that's a good question, and it's going to be one that comes up. Like I said, with the 20 vaccines that are in phase 3 clinical trials, I don't know how we're going to navigate all of these vaccines because people are going to want to choose. I want this one, I want that one, I want the one that's 95%, I want the one that's not an mRNA vaccine. There's all these different types of things. So that's something that we need to figure out in the coming months. Once we get the J&J data, we'll know a little bit more.
Excellent. There are 2 questions about sort of end of day vaccines or leftover vaccines. Is there any way for people to take advantage of unused vaccines?
So we do have a waste mitigation program. That's what that's called. That means that, no wasting any doses. The state actually mandates now every vaccine site to have a process. So our process is basically we give any leftover vaccines to inpatients in the hospital. that meet the criteria. So we have like an acute rehab that's right down the hall from the vaccine clinic. So we vaccinate those patients, and then we vaccinate staff who, you know, may just have not been vaccinated yet. There's like a call line that they can call to say, you know, I'm a nurse on the 6th floor and I want to sign up for a wasted dose. I'm ready to get my vaccine. And then, or to medical first responders. That we have a list and we have a number to contact for them as well. So that's the process we have in place. We try to give the wasted doses to people who are eligible in the current phase that we're in. I can tell you that our wastage is minimal. I mean, it's like 1%, if even that. We've not had to throw away any doses because of our waste program, but the number of shots that are at the end of the day that may be given out to these folks is maybe like less than 5. And you know, the other thing that the clinic does is that if there's a patient that comes at the end of the day and they have to open a new vial, so the Pfizer vials have 6 doses, Moderna has 10, you could potentially waste all those doses. We actually have the person come back the next morning. So we say, look, like we're at the end of the day and we don't want to waste all these doses. Can you come back tomorrow morning? And that has actually worked well also to prevent waste.
Great. With the new variants, are there new safety precautions that we should be taking?
Yeah, that's a good question. So nothing's new, but I do think my concern is that people have become complacent and very comfortable because our numbers are so good now in the state and nationwide. So people are traveling, people are, you know, doing all sorts of things. And my message would be that now's the time to double down on the things that we've been doing for the past year. So it's not that you have to do anything different, but you just have to continue to take them seriously. So wash your hands and wear your mask, make sure it fits well, social distance, don't go to parties, you know, all the things that we want to do. I think what the variants tell me is that it's, you know, we can't get lax because our numbers are good or better.
Okay. Can New York residents with an underlying condition who are King students get the vaccine in Connecticut once Connecticut opens up the next wave of phase 1B? Do you think being a student in Connecticut will change your eligibility?
It's a good question. So right now, we are told to turn away people who don't live in Connecticut, which is hard because we have patients who are Stamford Health patients who live in Rye, you know, or Westchester, and they can't come get vaccinated at their hospital. So the state has been very strict about the rules for phase 1A and 1B, saying that, you know, the only individuals who live in New York that can get vaccinated in Connecticut are those who are eligible under phase 1A. So if you're a doctor that works in Connecticut, but you live in New York, you can get vaccinated in Connecticut. But if you're if you run a financial hedge fund in Greenwich and you live in Rye and you're above the age of 75, you can't get vaccinated in Connecticut. So once it rolls out to schools and to essential workers and underlying conditions, I don't know what rules they're going to put into place. We originally were vaccinating everyone. I mean, we were vaccinating people from New Jersey. I mean, because we're of the mindset of get everyone vaccinated, right? Like, who cares? I don't, like, personally, it's like, I don't care where you live. Like, I want you to get protected and stop COVID. But the state cracked down on us a few weeks ago. And so we had to become more strict.
And do you know if supply constraints come from manufacturing or distribution?
Manufacturing. I mean, I think it's a combination of both, but I think that it's a manufacturer. There's just not enough, which is why, you know, we're hoping that Johnson & Johnson goes through, because that will really, change. And the state has increased the allocations starting next week. So there is going to be a little bit of we're getting a little bit more across the state for Pfizer and Moderna. So it's getting a little bit better, but it's not meeting, the supply isn't meeting our ability to get the vaccines out. We could probably vaccinate, 2,500 people a day, through this mega site, but we're just not being given enough to do that.
And our final question, which is perfect because it's 8 o'clock on the nose, is does Stamford Health have volunteer opportunities for people wanting to help at vaccination sites, and in return for volunteering, a volunteer can get a shot? Family members of mine in Washington State were able to get vaccinated in this way.
Yeah, I've had some friends from college in other states that have done the same. They've volunteered for a day and got a shot. So we have been actively recruiting both volunteers and workers, so vaccinators, observers, kind of greeters for this mega site. These would be folks that would be eligible for like a wasted dose of vaccine, or it'd be possible that you could get vaccinated. For the volunteers, I'm not sure what that means in terms of the ability to get a vaccine if you volunteered, if you're not otherwise eligible. But the information is available on the Stamford Health website. There's a link you can click to volunteer. It says ways to help. And so you can try to navigate that to get that information.
Well, thank you so much. This was a really great session. It was recorded, so we'll be sending that out and posting it on the website in case you want to either rewatch it, or if you have friends or family who didn't get to attend tonight. Dr. Shah, thank you so much for tonight and for all of your help through this pandemic. It's been a real huge help to the school, so thank you.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank
And
you.
have a good night.